August 19, 1944. Wehrmacht Headquarters, East Prussia. Generaloberst Alfred Jodl was reviewing the latest intelligence reports coming from the collapsing Western Front. His staff had calculated the mathematics of the Allied supply lines stretching over 400 miles from the Normandy beaches to Patton's Third Army, which was surging ahead. The Americans outpaced their logistics. Patton will stop in a few days, perhaps in a few hours. No army can sustain such advanced speeds without fuel. From his position at Hitler's headquarters, the Wolf's Lair, Jodl analyzed what every German general understood through experience. An armored division consumed 150,000 gallons of fuel per day when advancing. The Americans were now 400 miles from their supply depots. The calculation was inescapable. Patton's Third Army would halt, giving the Wehrmacht time to regroup at the Seine and perhaps hold out until winter. What Jodl did not know was that, 125 miles away, 5,158 trucks were already surging eastward. In an endless convoy, headlights on in defiance of military doctrine, carrying 12,500 tons of supplies every 24 hours. The Red Ball Express, a logistical operation so audacious that German military science had never conceived it as possible, was about to destroy every existing assumption about mechanized warfare. Within 72 hours, Patton's supposedly immobilized tanks would shatter German positions at the Seine. In a week, they would liberate Paris. In a month, they would be at the German border. The most brilliant military minds of the Wehrmacht were about to receive a lesson in American logistics that would redefine their understanding of modern war. Delivered by 23,000 truck drivers, 75% of them African-American soldiers, who transformed a one-way highway system into the most efficient military supply line in history. The German General Staff's confidence in American logistical failure came from decades of military experience and recent observations. The Wehrmacht had pioneered the Blitzkrieg, revolutionized combined arms warfare, and intimately understood the tyranny of supply lines. Their own campaigns had stalled repeatedly when logistics failed to keep pace with tactical success. In Russia, the Wehrmacht's advance had failed not initially due to Soviet resistance, but due to the simple inability to supply forces across vast distances. German trucks broke down on Russian roads. Horse-drawn wagons, still 80% of German military transport, could not keep up with the speed of panzer spearheads. Differences in rail gauge meant supplies piled up hundreds of miles from the front. General der Panzertruppe Heinrich von Luttwitz, who would command the 47th Panzer Corps starting in September 1944, had written in July, "The Americans face the same logistical impossibility we faced in Russia. Their mechanical advantage turns into a disadvantage. Machines require fuel, ammunition, parts. They have advanced 400 miles in 30 days. History teaches us what comes next. Paralysis." German intelligence meticulously tracked American consumption rates. A single Sherman tank burned half a mile per gallon on roads, much worse off-road. An infantry division required 700 tons of supplies daily. An armored division needed 1,000 tons. Patton commanded 12 divisions advancing on a 60-mile front. The math seemed irrefutable. 12,000 tons per day, transported 400 miles from the beaches, over damaged roads, through a transport network the Germans had systematically destroyed, during their retreat. General Lieutenant Siegfried Westphal, who would become Chief of Staff to Field Marshal von Rundstedt in September, calculated on August 20th, even if the Americans possessed unlimited trucks, which they do not, and perfect roads, which they do not, and no mechanical failures, which is impossible, they still could not sustain Patton's advance for more than another 48 hours. Physical laws cannot be violated, not even by American industry. At 2:00 p.m. on August 25, 1944, in a BDE requisitioned French chateau near Lay, Lieutenant Colonel Lauren Ayers of the Motor Transport Service faced a room full of skeptical officers. The math they presented was brutal. Patton's Third Army was consuming supplies faster than any army in history, advancing at speeds that defied all logistical planning. Traditional supply methods, rail transport, scheduled convoys, depot distribution had collapsed under the pressure. "Gentlemen," Ayers announced, "we are going to create a one-way highway, from Cherbourg and the beaches to the front line. Every vehicle will run 20 hours out of 24. No stops, except for gas and emergencies. We are going to move, at minimum, 12,500 tons per day." The name came from railroad terminology. A red ball freight was an express cargo that had priority over everything else. The Red Ball Express would operate on the same principle: absolute priority, no delays, no exceptions. The technical specifications defied German military doctrine. 2 parallel one-way highways, one for loaded trucks heading to the front, another for empty vehicles returning. 24-hour-a-day operations with headlights on, abandoning blackout discipline. A no-stop policy except for fuel and mechanical failure. 5-minute intervals between convoys, maintaining an average speed of 35 miles per hour. Mobile maintenance units every 50 miles. Military police posts removing any vehicle below 25 miles per hour. Colonel Charles O. Thrasher, commander of the Advanced Section Communication Zone, ADSEC, reviewed the projected numbers. "We need 140 truck companies, 5,958 vehicles at minimum, operating with 90% availability. That is impossible in any logistics manual ever written." Yet, within 36 hours, the impossible was in operation. On August 26, 1944, drivers from the 3916th Quartermaster Truck Company climbed into their 212-ton GMC CCKW trucks, nicknamed the Deuce and a Half, loaded with 105 mm artillery shells destined for Patton's guns in Melun, 300 miles to the Itabaki east. The demographic composition of the Red Ball Express would have left German racial theorists astonished. Of the 23,000 drivers who would eventually operate on the route, approximately 75% were African-American soldiers serving in a still segregated army. These men, who could not eat in white restaurants or use white facilities in much of America, kept the army of the most celebrated white general in motion. Drivers developed their own culture within hours. They painted slogans on their trucks. Patton's Blood Bank. Hitler, here we come. Detroit to Berlin Express. They created their own traffic rules. Slower vehicles pulled over immediately. Mechanical failures were pushed into ditches. Any truck under 20 miles per hour was considered a roadblock. On August 28th, German reconnaissance units began to report something unprecedented. Units of the Aufklärung 116 radioed from positions overlooking the main Red Ball route. Continuous vehicle column, headlights visible for 20 miles. No spacing, no blackout discipline. Estimate 1,000 vehicles per hour. The Americans have abandoned all military precautions. This violated everything German military doctrine taught. Headlights on at night invited air attacks. Continuous columns presented perfect targets for artillery. The lack of spacing between vehicles meant a single immobilized truck could stop an entire convoy. Yet, the Americans seemed indifferent. General Lieutenant Edgar Feuchtinger, commander of the 21st Panzer Division, personally observed the Red Ball Express from hidden positions on August 30th. His report to Army Group B headquarters reflected growing concern. The enemy operates a supply system beyond our comprehension. Vehicles pass at 30-second intervals, day and night, without pause. They do not hide. They do not disperse. They do not follow any rule we know. This is not military science. It is mass production applied to war. What the Germans could not understand was that American logistics operated on completely different principles. Where German doctrine emphasized concealment, the Americans relied on volume. Where the Germans conserved vehicles, the Americans assumed 20% mechanical failure and planned accordingly. Where the Germans followed rigid military procedures, the Americans improvised continuously. The figures achieved by the Red Ball Express defied German calculations of what was logistically possible. First week, August 25th to 31, 1944, 89,939 tons of supplies. Delivered. Daily average, 12,148 tons. Round-trip distance, 686 miles. Vehicle rotations, 5,158 trucks, making 1.5 daily trips. Fuel consumed by the operation itself, 300,000 gallons. German logistics specialists captured these numbers in American documents and dismissed them as propaganda. But the numbers were real, and they were increasing. By September 5th, the Red Ball Express had established a rhythm that seemed impossible to German logistics officers, who still relied on horse-drawn wagons for 80% of their transport. Convoys departed every 5 minutes from the western terminal. Average convoy, 67 vehicles. Load per vehicle, 5 tons standard, 7 tons in frequent overload. Time to cover 350 miles in one direction. Average of 14 hours. Stop time at each end, 2 hours. Vehicles in constant motion, 5,000 at any given time. The Red Ball Express generated innovations by the hour, as drivers and mechanics solved problems that German military science considered insurmountable. When trucks broke down, approximately 1,800 per day, mobile maintenance units made roadside repairs. Mechanics developed a triage system, 15 minutes to fix or push off the road. Parts were cannibalized from vehicles deemed irrecoverable. Engines were swapped in 45 minutes using mobile cranes. When the designated Red Ball route became congested, drivers created alternative paths. They requisitioned French buses to move personnel and free up trucks for cargo. They borrowed German vehicles, painted them olive, drab, and put them into service. They built detours around destroyed bridges, using rubble from bombed buildings as a road base. The Germans, observing this chaos that somehow produced order, could not comprehend it. German logistics doctrine emphasized careful planning, maintenance schedules, and proper procedures. The Americans violated every principle, and yet their system accelerated instead of collapsing. The most shocking revelation for German observers was American fuel management. The Red Ball Express consumed 300,000 gallons of gasoline per day, just in its own operations, more than many German armies received for all purposes. Yet, fuel was never lacking. The Americans had created a parallel marvel, Operation Pluto, pipelines under the ocean, installing fuel pipelines across the English Channel. By September 1944, fuel flowed through undersea pipes that German intelligence had not even detected. Forward fuel depots were established every 25 miles along the Red Ball route. Tanker trucks ran in their own parallel convoy system, ensuring no vehicle waited more than 10 minutes for refueling. General Major Walter Wielemont noted from aerial reconnaissance photographs, "The Americans have fuel depots larger than our entire strategic reserves. They burn more gasoline moving gasoline than we allocate for entire panzer divisions. This is not war as we understand it. It is industrial overflow." The Red Ball Express did not just supply Patton's advance. It multiplied its speed exponentially. German military doctrine calculated that an armored division could sustain an advance of 20 to 30 miles daily under ideal conditions. Patton's divisions, supplied by the Red Ball Express, maintained an average of 40 to 60 miles daily for weeks. On September 1, 1944, the 4th Armored Division advanced 35 miles in morning operations, stopped for refueling at noon. Red Ball trucks were already waiting with fuel and ammunition, and advanced another 32 miles in the afternoon. This 67-mile advance in a single day destroyed German defensive planning, which assumed a maximum of 30 miles of daily advance. Generaloberst Heinz Guderian, upon reviewing the reports in East Prussia, initially refused to believe them. No armored force can advance 60 miles per day for a week. Mechanical failures alone would prevent it. This is propaganda or misidentification. But intercepted American radio traffic confirmed it. More disturbing to German commanders was the fact that the Americans were broadcasting their positions openly, without code, extremely confident in their ability to move faster than the Germans could react. By September 5, 1944, German intelligence had compiled comprehensive reports on the Red Ball Express. The implications were catastrophic for Wehrmacht planning. Every assumption about American military capability needed to be revised. The report contained observations that defied German military science. The Americans wasted vehicles prodigiously, abandoning damaged trucks instead of repairing them. Drivers operated under the influence of stimulants for days, violating all principles of personnel management. There was no camouflage discipline, leaving the entire system vulnerable to air attacks that never came. Mechanical failure rates of 30% per day were simply overcome by redundancy. Fuel consumption that would bankrupt any European army. Field Marshal Walter Model's response revealed growing hopelessness. If these reports are accurate, we do not face a superior army, but a superior civilization. They make no effort to hide because they do not fear us. They waste resources because they have infinite resources. We cannot defeat this with military tactics. The drivers of the Red Ball Express paid a physical price that German observers could not see. Drivers operated for 72 hours straight, hallucinating from exhaustion and benzodrine. Accidents killed 300 drivers during the Red Ball's operational period. Trucks collided in the fog, overturned on damaged roads, burned when overheated engines caught fire. Yet, morale remained extraordinarily high. These men, mostly African American, deprived of equal rights at home, knew they were making history. They were proving Hitler's racial theories wrong with every mile covered, every ton delivered. Captured German officers provided eloquent testimony to the impact of the Red Ball Express. Oberst Hans von Luck, taken prisoner in September 1944, told interrogators, "We knew we had lost when we understood your supply system. You violate every rule. You waste fuel. You abandon vehicles. You exhaust drivers. And yet you succeed by sheer volume. You have industrialized war beyond our comprehension." The psychological impact on German forces was devastating. Wehrmacht soldiers could hear American trucks all night long, every night. Endless engines, endless supplies. They had 3 rounds per rifle, while the Americans brought millions of rounds. The sound itself turned into a psychological weapon. The vehicles themselves impressed German engineers. The 2.5-ton GMC CKTW truck, the backbone of the Red Ball Express, represented the perfection of mass production. General Motors had produced over 500,000 of these vehicles by the end of the war, more trucks than the entire German army possessed of all types combined. The trucks featured innovations the Germans had not implemented: 4-wheel drive as standard, not the exception; automatic tire inflation systems, sealing, that allowed 12-inch deep crossings; engines that ran on low-quality fuel without modification; heaters that actually worked in winter. Even more impressive was the American maintenance philosophy. Where the Germans rebuilt engines, the Americans replaced them. Where the Germans rationed parts, the Americans discarded entire vehicles for minor problems. Where the Germans had master mechanics, the Americans had thousands of competent mechanics capable of performing 80% of repairs. As the front moved east, the Red Ball Express adapted with a speed that astonished German planning officers, accustomed to weeks of preparation for major logistical changes. When the original route to Chartres became insufficient, the Americans created extensions of the Red Ball Express overnight. White Ball Express, from Rouen to Paris. Green Diamond, from Cherbourg to railroad transfer points. Red Lion, from Bayeux to Brussels. ABC, Antwerp, Brussels, Charleroi. Each new route was operational within 48 hours of conception. German general staff officers needed weeks to plan similar operations. The Americans simply painted new markings, designated trucks, and started rolling. The predominance of African American drivers in the Red Ball Express created cognitive dissonance for Nazi racial theorists. Nazi ideology declared black people inferior, incapable of technical tasks, lacking in initiative. Yet, these drivers performed logistical miracles that German forces could not match. The African American soldiers understood the irony. They knew what the Nazis thought of them, and it made them drive even harder. Every mile covered refuted Hitler. They fought racism with truck wrenches, defeating Nazi ideology through superior performance. Some German prisoners, forced to load Red Ball trucks as laborers, saw their worldview crumble while working alongside African American sergeants who calculated weight distribution faster than German engineers, who spoke English better than German English instructors, and who treated prisoners with fairness despite everything Nazi propaganda said about racial behavior. The Red Ball Express required infrastructure that the Germans considered impossible to create under combat conditions. Engineers built or reinforced 40 bridges, created 15 major fuel depots, established 26 maintenance stations, and built 8 temporary cities for drivers, all while the operation was underway. The bridge at Mantes had been destroyed by German Tuatworthe engineers specifically to interrupt American logistics. The Wehrmacht calculated that replacement would require, at minimum, 6 weeks. American engineers built a temporary bridge in 14 hours, while Red Ball convoys diverted only 8 miles over makeshift roads hastily opened by bulldozers. German engineers watched American construction methods with amazement. No planning meetings, no detailed blueprints, just immediate action. They built faster than the Germans could destroy, creating infrastructure that sprang up overnight in French fields. One achievement of the Red Ball Express in particular left German artillery officers stunned. Ammunition supply rates that exceeded their most optimistic theoretical calculations. American artillery units fired without restriction, a luxury no German unit had enjoyed since 1942. During the reduction of the fortifications at Metz in September 1944, the artillery of the Deutschkorps fired 100,000 rounds in 24 hours. The Red Ball Express delivered every one of those rounds, plus 20% extra. The German artillery defending Metz received a ration of 50 rounds per gun per day. The disparity was overwhelming. American guns fired continuously for hours, while German artillery officers calculated that bombardments of that intensity required 50 full truckloads of ammunition per hour. The Red Ball provided this without pause. The Red Ball Express consumed vehicles at rates that would have paralyzed any other army. By the end of September, mechanical attrition was reaching staggering proportions. Average vehicle life, 10,000 miles. Normal, 30,000. Daily deadline rate, 30% of all vehicles. Engines replaced, 500 per week. Tires consumed, 10,000 per week. Total vehicles destroyed or abandoned, over 5,000. Still, the operation never slowed down. American production had anticipated such losses. Ships arrived weekly at French ports, carrying hundreds of new trucks. Replacement drivers were trained in 2 days and launched directly into the IED convoys. German calculations showed that the Americans destroyed more trucks per week than the Wehrmacht possessed in all of France. Yet, American transport capacity increased rather than decreased. They had achieved something the Germans considered impossible: logistics faster than consumption. French civilians along the Red Ball route witnessed an American abundance that contradicted years of scarcity under German occupation. The psychological impact on occupied populations was immediate and profound. Red Ball Express drivers, especially African Americans, frequently shared their rations with French civilians despite regulations. At every stop, children gathered, and drivers gave them chocolate, cigarettes, soap. The contrast with the German occupation was stark. Americans casually distributed what the Germans rigidly rationed. German intelligence reported the propagandistic impact. French civilians now believe American victory is inevitable. They cite the truck convoys as proof. Resistance activity has increased 400% along the Red Ball routes. The population that accepted our occupation now actively fights it. In early September 1944, the Red Ball Express faced its greatest challenge. Patton's Third Army had advanced so far that even the Red Ball struggled to maintain supply rates. The round trip now exceeded 700 miles. Drivers were collapsing. Vehicles were disintegrating. German intelligence detected the strain. General der Panzertruppe Hasso von Manteuffel reported on September 8th, American supply lines show signs of collapse. Intervals between convoys have increased from 5 to 15 minutes. Vehicle speed has decreased. This is our opportunity. But American adaptability again surprised the Germans. Within 72 hours, the Red Ball Express reorganized, created intermediate transfer points, reducing individual runs to 350 miles, implemented driver rotation systems, established forward maintenance bases, and doubled the number of designated vehicles. By September 12th, the tonnage delivered had actually increased. The crisis that should have paralyzed Patton only made the system stronger. Complementing the Red Ball Express, the Americans implemented another logistical solution that the Germans considered impossible: large-scale aerial resupply. C-47 transport aircraft began delivering critical supplies directly to units on the front lines. Each aircraft carried 3 tons. On September 16, 1944, Wehrmacht observers counted 900 transport flights in a single day, delivering 2,700 tons by air. The Luftwaffe, at its peak, had achieved 300 daily tons for Stalingrad and considered that a maximum effort. The Americans used transport aircraft like trucks, without concerns for fighter escorts, without fuel limitations. They assumed losses and crushed them with numbers. The Wehrmacht could not compete with this industrial arithmetic. The Red Ball Express operated under command principles that violated the German military hierarchy. Junior officers made decisions reserved for generals in the Wehrmacht. Sergeants commanded operations larger than those under the responsibility of German colonels. This decentralization confused German observers. American logistics operated without apparent central control. Every lieutenant acted like a general, every sergeant like a colonel. The result should have been chaos. Instead, they achieved efficiency. The Wehrmacht could not match this with its rigid hierarchy. In October 1944, advancing railheads began to reduce the needs of the Red Ball Express. The operation, which was supposed to last 10 days, had continued for 82 days, delivering 412,000 tons of supplies over 122 million ton-miles. German commanders, now fighting on their own borders, reflected on what they had witnessed. Field Marshal Model wrote in his final report, "We were not defeated primarily by American tanks or planes. We were defeated by American trucks." The Red Ball Express proved that, in modern war, logistics is strategy. The transition to rail transport was, in itself, an extraordinary feat. American railway engineers had rebuilt 1,000 miles of destroyed French rail lines while the Red Ball was still running. They laid new tracks faster than the Germans could destroy them, often using captured German railway material. The final statistics of the Red Ball Express defied all German calculations regarding what was logistically possible. 82 days of operation, 412,193 tons of supplies delivered, 222 million ton-miles, 5,958 vehicles on average, peak of 7,000, 23,000 drivers employed in total, 700,000 gallons of fuel consumed daily, 40,000 tons of ammunition delivered just for Patton, 15 million rations transported, 135,000 tons of medical supplies. Upon reviewing these figures in captivity, German officers admitted they had calculated American logistics based on European precedents. They had multiplied their best performance by 3 and assumed that would be the American maximum. They were wrong by a factor of 10. Beyond tonnage and distance, the Red Ball Express achieved something deeper. It destroyed German faith in their own military superiority. Wehrmacht officers who had dismissed the Americans as weak and mechanically dependent saw these same Americans perform logistical miracles through determination and industrial abundance. German prisoners of war stood silently by the camp fences, counting the passing Red Ball trucks. Some wept. They understood what it meant. Not just that the Americans could supply their armies, but that they could waste more than the Germans could produce. They were watching their worldview collapse, one truck at a time. The Red Ball Express forced an unexpected racial reckoning within the American armed forces themselves. The success of the operation depended overwhelmingly on African American soldiers who were still segregated, deprived of equal treatment, and barred from combat roles. General Eisenhower, visiting Red Ball operations in Midway-Sintifiu, September 1944, witnessed the contradiction firsthand. His aide, Captain Harry Butcher, recorded, "The general stood watching colored drivers who had been at it for 20 hours straight. He said, 'These men are winning the war as surely as any infantry. We need to reconsider many things.'" The success created pressure for integration that contributed to military desegregation. 3 years later, African American soldiers had proven in France what they had always known. With the tools and the opportunity, they were equal to anyone. The Red Ball was their combat, and they won it decisively. German racial theorists struggled to explain the contradiction. SS racial science publications simply stopped mentioning American logistical operations. The evidence was too strong to deny and too destructive to admit. German military engineers studied Red Ball Express operations intensely after the war. The lessons revolutionized logistical thinking worldwide. Volume overcomes inefficiency. Mechanical redundancy eliminates vulnerability. Decentralized execution allows speed. Standardization multiplies capacity. Human endurance has limits, but they are higher than previously assumed. General Franz Halder, former German Chief of Staff, wrote in 1950, "The Red Ball Express proved that logistics determines strategy, and not the other way around. The Americans understood this. We learned too late." Among the 23,000 Red Ball drivers, individual stories of heroism emerged that the Germans considered incomprehensible within their military framework. These were accounts verified in military records. Corporal John L. Houston drove continuously for 48 hours, delivering ammunition to the 2nd Armored Division in Cambrai, falling asleep at the wheel 3 times, but continuing after being revived by other drivers. Private Booker T. Washington's truck caught fire due to overheated brakes while transporting medical supplies. Instead of abandoning it, as procedure required, he drove the flaming vehicle for 2 miles to a field hospital, jumping out just as the flames reached the cab. The supplies saved wounded soldiers from both armies. These stories, multiplied thousands of times, revealed American military culture to German observers. Individual initiative, calculated risk-taking, and mission accomplishment over strict obedience to rules. Desperate, German forces tried to create their own version of the Red Ball Express in late 1944. Operation Greif, during the Battle of the Oki Bulge, included plans to use captured American trucks to create German supply lines. The effort failed immediately. German drivers could not maintain American speeds. German mechanics could not fix American equipment fast enough. German fuel supplies could not sustain those consumption rates. More fundamentally, the Germans could not replicate the American attitude of unlimited resources. Skorzeny, commander of the operation, reported, "We captured 50 American trucks. Within a week, 30 were out of service. The Americans would have replaced them. We tried to fix them. That difference explains our defeat." The winter of 1944 to 1945 offered the ultimate test to the Red Ball Express. Freezing rain, snow, and ice should have halted wheeled transport. German doctrine stated that logistics with wheeled vehicles became impossible below 10 degrees Celsius. Yet, the Red Ball Express continued. Drivers put chains on the tires, poured alcohol into the radiators, and kept rolling. Speeds dropped from 35 to 15 miles per hour, but the delivered tonnage continued. German observers reported ice-covered convoys pushing through blizzards that had stopped panzer divisions. The Americans had created a logistical system that functioned regardless of weather, terrain, or enemy action. It was neither elegant nor efficient by German standards, but it was unstoppable. In May 1945, captured German logistics officers were forced to study Red Ball Express operations for historical record purposes. Their conclusions were unanimous and devastating to German military pride. General of Infantry Friedrich Schulz summarized, "The Red Ball Express represents a type of warfare we never imagined. The Americans created a temporary civilization. Thousands of men, thousands of vehicles, millions of tons of supplies that existed only to feed armies, then dissolved when they were no longer needed. We built permanent infrastructure over years. They created superior temporary systems in a matter of days." The most insightful analysis came from General Heinz Guderian, father of German armored warfare. "We invented the Blitzkrieg, but we never solved its fundamental limitation: logistics. The Americans solved it through an industrial excess that we considered impossible. The Red Ball Express was not a supply line, but a flowing river of material that drowned our forces. The Red Ball Express cost the United States approximately $100 million in 1944, destroyed vehicles, consumed fuel, ruined roads, French damage claims. German staff officers, accustomed to managing scarcity, found this number incomprehensible. Still, the Americans considered it cheap. The operation allowed for the capture of 400,000 German soldiers, the liberation of France, Belgium, and Luxembourg, and shortened the war by about 6 months. Every day of war cost the United States $250 million. The Red Ball Express paid for itself in a single day of shortened conflict. Lieutenant General John C. H. Lee, responsible for logistics in the European theater, stated, "We wore out 5,000 trucks and 23,000 men to destroy the German army in France. In any previous war, that would be a catastrophic loss. In American industrial warfare, it is an acceptable operating cost." An unexpected consequence of the Red Ball Express was the revolutionary impact on post-war civilian logistics. Thousands of drivers returned to the United States with experience operating the largest transport network in the world. These veterans founded trucking companies, designed interstate highways, and created the modern American logistics industry. Companies like Yellow Freight, Roadway, and Consolidated Freightways were created by Red Ball veterans who applied military logistics to civilian commerce. They had learned in France that volume overcomes efficiency, speed overcomes perfection, and that if you keep trucks running 24 hours a day, you can move the world. Military historians universally recognize the Red Ball Express as the decisive logistical operation of the European theater. Without it, Patton's advance would have stalled, Paris would have fallen weeks later, and German forces would have successfully established defensive lines for the winter. The operation validated American military doctrine that emphasized logistics over tactics. While German officers studied Clausewitz and battlefield maneuvers, the Americans studied Detroit assembly lines and railroad schedules. The Red Ball Express demonstrated that, in modern war, the ability to supply forces determines victory more than tactical brilliance. On September 15, 1944, Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, German Supreme Commander in the West, received comprehensive information about the Red Ball Express. After studying the reports for hours, he summoned his staff. "Gentlemen," he announced, "we are facing something beyond a military solution. The Americans have created a supply system that makes distance irrelevant. Our strategy assumed a culminating point where advancing forces would outrun their supplies. That point does not exist. They have revolutionized warfare, and we are fighting the last one." His operations officer, Oberst Hans Speidel, suggested interdicting the Red Ball routes with what remained of the Luftwaffe. Von Rundstedt's response revealed total understanding. "With what will we interdict? They have 6,000 trucks. If we destroy 1,000, which we cannot, they will replace them in a week. We would need to destroy 200 trucks a day just to match their production. We do not have 200 aircraft in total." Behind the statistics, there were human stories that revealed the American character to German observers. Drivers who had not slept for 3 days refusing rest because their trucks might not arrive without them. Mechanics working under freezing rain to keep convoys moving. Teenagers lying about their age to drive trucks. These stories, multiplied throughout the entire operation, created a mythology that demoralized German forces. The Americans were not weak, as propaganda claimed. They pushed themselves harder than the Germans pushed their horses. But they did it voluntarily, not out of fear. This made them more dangerous than German doctrine had understood. The Red Ball Express became unintentional propaganda, more powerful than any planned operation. German soldiers could hear the convoys at night, endless streams of engines that never stopped. The sound itself became a psychological weapon. German units reported hearing ghost convoys that demoralized the troops as effectively as the real logistics themselves. The knowledge that the Americans had unlimited supplies, while the Germans rationed their last ammunition, created a despair that undermined combat effectiveness. American psychological warfare units recognized the impact. They began broadcasting truck engine sounds toward German lines when no real convoys were present. German units reported these ghost convoys as if they were real, demonstrating the psychological damage inflicted by the Red Ball Express. In November 1944, with rail lines partially restored, the Red Ball Express was officially discontinued. But its methods had permanently revolutionized military logistics. The concept of continuous, high-volume, wasteful yet effective supply became American military doctrine. The final innovation was the speed of dissolution. The massive operation, 23,000 men, 6,000 vehicles, hundreds of facilities, disappeared within 72 hours. Troops were relocated, vehicles redistributed, routes returned to civilian use. The Germans needed months to create smaller operations and years to dissolve them. The Americans built what they needed, used it, discarded it, and built something better. When German generals surrendered in May 1945, many specifically cited the Red Ball Express as proof of the futility of continued resistance. General der Panzertruppe Hasso von Manteuffel stated in his interrogation, "When we understood your logistical capacity, we knew the war was lost. You could supply armies faster than we could destroy them. The Red Ball Express was a weapon against which we had no defense." Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, one of Germany's most competent commanders, was asked what had most surprised him about American forces. His response, "It was not your tanks, it was not your planes, but your trucks. The Red Ball Express showed us that you had militarized the entire productive capacity of your society. We were fighting your factories, not just your soldiers." The final statistics of the Red Ball Express stand as a testament to American industrial warfare. Total cargo delivered, 412,193 tons. Total distance covered, 122 million ton-miles. Trucks employed, 5,958 on average, 7,000 at peak. Drivers involved, 23,000 in total. Days of operation, 82. Fuel consumed, 57 million gallons. Tires worn out, 180,000. Vehicles destroyed, more than 5,000. Cost, $100 million. German divisions defeated by supply advantage, 47. Estimated days of war shortened, 180. These numbers tell a story that transcends military operations. They represent the moment when war changed forever, when industrial capacity became more important than tactical brilliance, when logistics began to determine strategy instead of just serving it. In 1994, on the 50th anniversary of D-Day, the United States Postal Service issued a commemorative stamp honoring the Red Ball Express at the National Postal Museum in Washington, D.C. The ceremony recognized the operation that had been overshadowed by combat actions, but which proved equally decisive for the Allied victory. Veterans who attended spoke of their pride in an operation that proved American industrial strength and individual determination could overcome any obstacle. They had driven through exhaustion, mechanical failures, and weather that stopped armored units. They were mostly black soldiers, segregated, discriminated against, deprived of recognition during the war, but who had delivered victory at 35 miles per hour. The Red Ball Express proved that, in modern war, logistics is not support. It is the main effort. The operation demonstrated that an industrial democracy could mobilize resources on a scale that totalitarian efficiency could not match. German generals who had laughed at American logistics were silenced by 6,000 trucks, delivering 12,500 daily tons over 700 miles of liberated France. They had assumed the Americans would follow European precedent, preserving resources and advancing with caution. Instead, the Americans created a logistical tsunami that drowned German forces in Allied abundance. The success of the operation did not come from military genius, but from American characteristics that the Germans never understood: industrial excess, mechanical aptitude, improvisational skill, and, above all, the initiative of individual soldiers who made independent decisions that, in the Wehrmacht, would require field marshal approval. In his memoirs, General George S. Patton, whose Third Army was the main beneficiary of the Red Ball Express, wrote the definitive tribute. The truck drivers of the Red Ball Express deserve as much credit for the defeat of Germany as any combat unit. They drove through exhaustion, mechanical failures, and weather that stopped armor. Without them, the Third Army does not move. Without movement, we do not win. They were mostly black soldiers, segregated, discriminated against, deprived of recognition. But they won the war as surely as any rifleman. History needs to record this truth. That truth remains as the final testament of the Red Ball Express. 23,000 drivers, mostly African American, operating 6,000 trucks on a one-way highway toward victory, achieved what German military science had declared impossible. They supplied advancing armies faster than physics should allow, maintained the pace beyond human endurance, and proved that, in modern war, the side with more trucks beats the side with the best tactics. The German generals had mocked American logistics, dismissing it as wasteful, undisciplined, impossible to sustain. 82 days later, these same generals surrendered to armies supplied by the Red Ball Express, finally understanding that American trucks had defeated German tanks, that industrial abundance had crushed military excellence, that logistics had become strategy. The Red Ball Express ended on November 16, 1944, but its impact echoed through military history. It proved that, in the industrial age, victory belongs not to the bravest soldiers or the most brilliant generals, but to the nation that can deliver more supplies, faster and farther. The German generals who laughed at American logistics in August 1944 signed surrender documents in May 1945, defeated by 23,000 truck drivers who revolutionized war at 35 miles per hour. Their story deserves a place among the great military operations in history. Not because it was elegant or efficient. It was neither of those things, but because it worked. The Red Ball Express kept Patton moving, kept the Germans retreating, and proved that, in modern war, the truck convoy matters more than the tank column. The highways of France still carry the scars of the Red Ball Express. Ruts opened by overloaded trucks, hastily repaired bridges, shoulders littered with abandoned vehicles. But the greatest monument to the operation is the speed of the Allied victory. Every day less of war saved thousands of lives. The Red Ball Express shortened that time by months. In the end, the German generals who laughed at American logistics learned the hardest lesson of modern war. Amateurs talk about tactics, professionals talk about logistics, and Americans talk about trucks. The Red Ball Express was America talking very loud, in the roar of 6,000 engines that never stopped, carrying democracy and destruction at 35 miles per hour down a one-way road toward victory. The last word belongs to a German officer whose name was lost to history, quoted by a Red Ball driver at the 1994 commemoration. Standing beside a road in Belgium, watching the endless convoy of American trucks, the officer said in heavily accented English to his captors, "We prepared for everything. Your tanks, your planes, your ships. We never prepared for your trucks. How do you defeat an enemy who has more trucks than you have soldiers?" The answer passed before him at 5-minute intervals, driven by exhausted Americans who were rewriting the rules of war, one delivery at a time. The Red Ball Express had transformed logistics into strategy, supply into victory, and trucks into the most decisive weapon of the war in Europe. The German generals stopped laughing when they understood this truth, but by that point, Patton was already at their gates, supplied by the greatest logistical operation in military history.